Welcome, everybody, to the Nuggets of Gold podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the 49ers wide receiver 3 battle. There's a couple names that definitely need to be brought up, and then there's a couple long shots that are fun to talk about. But we're going to go over 3 guys mainly today, those guys being Austin Watkins Jr., Richie James Jr., and Jalen Hurd. Now, those are the 3 guys I think that are really competing for the roster spot. There's also a couple other names that you got to bring up, like Travis Benjamin, Mohamed Sanu, River Craycraft, Kevin White, and the 49ers also traded for a guy named Sherfield from the Cardinals, and he can kind of maybe make the roster as a deep threat. I think he probably will make the roster, but I don't think he's going to be this wide receiver 3 in terms of touches in the offense. But I think right now you have 2 locks for making the team, and those guys are Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. You could probably put Jalen Hurd in that name as well, or that range as well, just because former 3rd-round pick, haven't really got to see him. Injuries have plagued his career, but I think we should start this one out with Austin Watkins. And I'll let you start out, Aiden. What are just your overall thoughts when you kind of turned on the tape of Austin Watkins, and what did you like about him? And really, what do you think his role can be on this 49ers team?
So Austin Watkins is 6'1", 210, built pretty much exactly to Mohamed Sanu, who's 6'2", 210. Went to UAB and absolutely killed the Senior Bowl. I was really surprised that he didn't get drafted, at least late. He's a great route runner, but he's not a burner. One thing that this wide receiver room is missing, with the exception of Travis Benjamin, who I think we both agree probably isn't going to make the roster, so we don't have that vertical deep threat. Watkins isn't the fastest guy, but he's similar to Kendrick Bourne. And I think if he plays well in camp, it's going to be between him and Sanu to really make that roster spot. And I expect him to make the roster. I think he was priority number 1 for the Niners in that undrafted free agent market.
Yeah, I remember when we filmed an episode just about like the day 3 picks, and we were talking about, these are the guys that Niners are taking. They take a running back late in Elijah Mitchell, and you were like, well, hey, hopefully, a guy like Austin Watkins goes undrafted and the Niners can go and capitalize and take him. And that's exactly what happened. He was a pretty big Senior Bowl standout. I watched all of his one-on-ones earlier this morning, which was cool to see. And you just see very technical route running, really smart, a lot of head fakes, a lot of little staggers and whatnot to get open. I love just his overall route running technique, and he created a lot of separation like that. It's really clear he's not, some burner or some guy that's just going to fly out there and be some vertical threat. And that was also something I read in a couple of scouting reports, like, hey, this guy is limited to not being a vertical threat. Well, that's fine. I mean, the 49ers use Kendrick Bourne in a similar role. Yeah, Kendrick Bourne coming out of Eastern Washington. Now you have Austin Watkins coming out of Alabama, Birmingham. Both these guys are undrafted wide receivers, but they're really good at just finding ways to get open. And you bring up Austin Watkins, kind of his skill set. I think it's definitely going to be he's going to be a guy that comes in on second, passing downs in medium to short situations, and he's going to come out there and run a 5-yard out, run a little slant route, run a little dig. And I think we're going to see him used in a lot of cases where he comes in and they either have Brandon Ayuk in the slot next to him or George Kittle out wide, and he's going to be that other guy's going to run a dig that's not going to get the defense focused on him, but they're going to be focused on George Kittle or Brandon Ayuk. And I think we're going to see him make a lot of big 3rd down catches. I fully expect him to make the roster. I like that you brought up Sanu as kind of the guy that he's competing with. And I do think there's a way that both of them make the roster, but I think in terms of touches, they're going to be competing for, all right, who's going to get these touches? And if he looks good in camp, we should fully expect him to kind of be maybe not the wide receiver 3, but I think the wide receiver 4. Even though I think out of these guys we're going to talk about today, and Austin Watkins, Richie James, and Jalen Hurd, I think he probably gets the least amount of catches, but he's going to have very impactful catches, I think. And I think we're going to see him come in there, 3rd and 5, runs a 7-yard dig, gets it, big 1st down, early on in the season even. And I think we'll kind of see that mold and that great route running and just ability to go out and catch the ball. Also, another thing I want to bring up is he adjusts to the ball really well. and he has really strong hands. Like a lot of his catches are coming where he makes a catch and someone comes and drills him in the back, or there's a lot of contact around it, and he's able to hang on to the ball and just make really good catches. So lack of drops early on can really bode well for him in training camp.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You brought up the impactful catches. Who does that sound like? It sounds a lot like Kendrick Bourne to me, a guy that we lost in free agency. I think that it's going to be more of a committee to replace Bourne, but like you said, I fully expect Watkins to make some sort of impact in that regard.
Yeah, so let's kind of move on from Austin Watkins and get into Richie James Jr. a little bit. A lot of 49er fans really high on Richie James Jr. coming out 7th-round pick a couple years back. And you kind of just look at his mold, 5'10", 185. I've always thought of him as, a little bit more of a burner than a lot of other guys on the 49ers roster. Interestingly, though, he only ran a 4.48 coming out of school, which I did not realize that was his 40 time, so not super good. But then you kind of look at how he gets open, and a lot of it's quickness. So, I mean, you get open and you are able to spread the field vertically. It doesn't really matter how you do it, if it's, straight line speed or just this ability to get open. But last season, 394 yards and 1 touchdown, and very funny, 184 and 1 touchdown came against the Packers. So almost all of his production in one game where he was basically the featured wide receiver with a lot of guys out. I think that's promising for him. But what do you kind of see his role what do you think his role is gonna be this season?
So I have an interesting Richie James kind of thought. We're pretty sure that he's going to make the roster. I think he's going to make the roster, but his primary use last year and his primary use as this undrafted free agent was as a kick returner. The Niners drafted 2 guys, Ambry Thomas and Elijah Mitchell, who both can return kicks. And Shanahan, he and Richie James have a weird thing going on where every Niner fan feels that Richie James should play more, but Shanahan doesn't play him. I feel like he's that would be my hot take is Richie James either gets traded or doesn't make the roster, and a guy like Sanu makes the roster. If he's not returning kicks well, obviously we're not at practice, so we're not able to see it, but that's kind of the hot take. But that said, I definitely expect him to make the roster, kind of just something to think about. But he doesn't really do anything crazy. He's solid. I think that he should have somewhere around 30 catches. Last year he had 23. And I think, Matt, you said four touchdowns should be the goal, which is something interesting to really think about.
Yeah, no, and you kind of talking about him potentially not making the roster. I'm assuming that comes from not really like, oh, this guy's not good enough to make the roster, but just like he hasn't really been utilized.
Exactly.
And a lot of people have wanted him to be on the field more, and he just hasn't. And for forever, what reason that is, we just haven't seen that. So maybe he's a guy that needs to benefit from a quarterback that can spread the field more vertically. Maybe that's part of the reason. Maybe if Trey Lance comes out, like we're going to see more of Richie James. I'm not really sure, but I think you're right about kind of just bringing up like, hey, he was the kick returner. That was one of his main responsibilities. I know that one of our listeners said that they fully expect like Ambry Thomas to be the guy that returns kicks. And if Elijah Mitchell can do that as well, like those guys are probably more likely to be, the kick returner and the punt returners. But Richie James, I mean, I do think he's going to kind of be this third wide receiver. So it's interesting that you kind of think that there's a chance that he doesn't make the roster, which I think is totally fair, just because it has been weird how he's been used in his time in San Francisco. But what I'm kind of thinking is play that Taylor Gabriel role from the 2016 Falcons offense. Now, I don't think he's going to put up the same production that Taylor Gabriel did. That offense threw the ball a lot more than this Niners offense is probably planning to. And I expect Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle to take, almost all of those touches. I think that both of them are probably shooting for about 90 catches this year, or 90 touches, because, we've seen Brandon Ayuk used in the pass game a little bit more. But he can be a very productive complementary piece. And you brought up the 4 touchdowns. I think if Richie James has 4 touchdowns, I think that shows that if he is the wide receiver 3, that he played his role pretty well. And, he caught the defense lacking a few times throughout the year. 4 touchdowns, hopefully some bigger shots. I think that, but that's a big deal when you kind of start looking at, hey, the defense had to respect him enough that he had 4 touchdowns on about like 30 catches or so. I think that's what we should expect out of him. And in terms of yards, I think a lot of them are just going to be shots and blown coverages and whatnot when he's in the game. But I think one of the other things is it's hard to kind of evaluate him when he's not being schemed to get open. Besides that Packers game, which he looked so good in, it's Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and the run game that's really getting schemed up to flourish. The offense isn't focusing on, we got to get Richie James' touches. So, like, what he's able to do is going to be based on what the defense is kind of the looks that the defense are giving. So, I would love if he could get 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's kind of one of those things where, like, I definitely expect him to make the roster, but he's kind of a guy who is either going to be wide receiver 3, or I think that's a 90% chance, and there's a 10% chance that he doesn't make the roster. He's in the last year of his contract. That's something to keep in mind. And there's just so many unknowns surrounding this guy. When he's on the field, he's been good. He's dealt with a couple injuries, but he hasn't gotten the opportunity, like you said, for us to really evaluate him.
One guy that could potentially kind of steal his targets a little bit and maybe steal his role even would be a guy like Travis Benjamin. Obviously, he opted out for the 2020 year, so we haven't seen him in a Niners uniform. But Travis Benjamin is a burner. He's a guy that could definitely play that vertical role and really spread the defense. I don't know what he has left in the tank. I mean, he's been in the league for quite a while, but I definitely think like if there's a way where Richie James isn't that true third wide receiver, and also if we're saying like wide receiver 3, I still expect Jalen Hurd to get more touches, but he's going to be used more as a gadget player. So wide receiver 3 is really like how often is he lining up, in that slot or in that outside role. And I just think that he's going to be one of the guys that kind of is or listed on the depth chart as the third wide receiver, which doesn't mean all that much at the end of the day. But I think this role of spreading the field vertically, he could lose it to Travis Benjamin. And I think that's a very possible thing that could happen. And I know, we've seen Richie James on the team for a lot longer. So I think a lot of fans are going to go like, hey, I'd rather see Richie out there. I would as well. But I think that would just be if Travis basically beats him out, which I don't think that we should be like, I mean, competition is great, but I don't think that we should really be like rooting for an older player like Travis Benjamin to start getting, a lot of catches and a lot of touches. I think having these younger players like a Richie James, like a Jalen Hurd or an Austin Watkins, I think that's better, especially than the Travis Benjamins and Mohamed Sanu's. But a guy that's definitely the guy that I think that he's competing with for that kind of role to go out there and run a lot of posts, run a lot of streaks, seams, a lot of stuff like that, where he's really just trying to keep the defense honest. And I don't know, that's the guy I kind of think that he will be competing with a little bit. But do you think Travis Benjamin is kind of the guy that he's mostly going to be competing with in camp?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I mean, I feel like we're talking about these guys and we're trying to replace what Kendrick Bourne brought. Obviously, he didn't have the speedster element that we didn't have with anybody last year. But I kind of look at it as Austin Watkins. That might be that third down guy. Hurd could be pretty much everything else. And Benjamin could add something new. It's just interesting to really think about, but I think you and I are both on the same wavelength in that we expect Richie James to make the roster and to improve on last year, kind of in a contract year.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think that'll probably do it for Richie James. So let's move on to the final receiver that we're going to be talking about today. A very polarizing player for the Niners, 3rd round pick. He got drafted. I was wrong on my initial evaluation of him. I thought he was going to be better than Deebo Samuel. Turns out Deebo Samuel is a stud, and unfortunately, we haven't really seen much of Jalen Hurd. But Jalen Hurd, very, very interesting player. And I saw a tweet yesterday that I think sums up how I kind of initially thought about him, and I think a lot of 49er fans it was basically there hasn't been another player that has played one quarter that one quarter has instilled so much faith into the fan base of this guy. Because, I mean, he had that quarter of the preseason game against the Cowboys, and everyone like, oh, my God, imagine if Jalen Hurd gets healthy. This guy's going to be complete animal. And then we just haven't seen him since then. But, I mean, I still think everyone kind of remembers that game and thinks about, hey, like, this dude could be a stud. I definitely still think there's a chance that he could. But but just kind of projecting how much he's going to play next year, the big thing is going to be health. If he's healthy the whole year, and I don't think we're going to see him used a ton, but you can find room for a guy that's 6'5", 230, runs a 4.6, incredible burst. I mean, he played running back. I think everyone knows that. Then goes to Baylor. He went to Baylor, played running back there, then went to Tennessee, played wide out there. I think that's the right combo. It could be flip-flopped, but he's just a freak athlete. He can play that. He can play all over the field. I think we're going to see him at outside receiver, in the slot, at running back, at tight end, even at fullback in some situations. I think, and not a true fullback lead blocker, but stuff where he's going to fall out and get open in the flats and do things like that. I think we're going to see him almost strictly used in sub packages. So he'll probably be listed as like a wide receiver 5, but then get more touches than whoever is playing in that vertical role, and then that kind of like third down role where you're coming on the field to make a big 5-yard catch or whatever that is. And he's not really. I don't really think he's competing with anyone for a roster spot. I think he kind of has it. I wouldn't say he's a lock in terms like how Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk are, but for him, it's all really going to come on, can he be healthy and how does he look post injury? Because that's the biggest thing for me. But what are your just overall thoughts on Jalen Hurd?
I think that the most interesting takeaway for me is that he's going to take some of those Deebo touches where Deebo gets the touch pass, the screen on the outside. I think Hurd's going to take a few of those. I think we looked it up before the show. Deebo had 71 touches his rookie year. I expect him to be around 50, while Hurd takes maybe 30. And it's kind of just something to consider. And I think that's a positive thing because less touches means you're going to be more fresh, and you're probably going to get hurt at less often, I guess. So I think being able to spread it around, and especially when these guys are taking more hits, and both of them have struggled with injuries in the past, it's definitely a good thing to at least consider. And it's something that I expect to happen.
I also think there's a good chance that we see him use a lot in the red zone where he comes in. It's just really like a mismatch play. I saw him used a lot on that in a few games where whoever he was playing for, he'd come in at running back or at wide receiver, and they'd throw little like out routes, or they'd even put him in and line him up in like I formations and just pound the rock with him. I do think his pad height is a little bit too high to play running back in the NFL. Like he's gonna get clobbered a couple times by some bigger linebackers. But using him in space, if he's one-on-one with a corner, the dude's 6'5", 230 and played running back in college football. Like he's going to be able to handle a lot of these guys and break a lot of tackles. Very similar to how Deebo Samuel has. But I mean, I'm excited for him. I think the burst and stuff, if that's still there post injury, because we got to remember he had a neck injury and then he had an ACL. So those are two pretty serious injuries. If he's a similar athlete, if he's close to as good of an athlete as he was before, I think that he could be really, really good. But it's such a big if with him. We just really don't know how he's going to look. But how many touches do you think he's going to get this next season if he is healthy for 17 games or most of the 17 game season?
I think I mentioned it really quickly, but somewhere around 30 to 35, I think is what he should be shooting for, about 2 a game.
Yeah, and I think that's good. I think we'll see him maybe a little bit featured in some games when teams have smaller linebackers or whatever the mismatch is. And if he gets more than 35 touches, I think that's a good sign. I think that shows that he's playing well, that they think that they have an advantage when he's on the field, which is obviously a very good thing for the 49ers if they're using these guys in these gadget roles and it's working. I mean, we've seen that work so well these last couple of years that he's like the ultimate gadget guy for this offense. Like he's the guy that Shanahan drafted to be that true gadget guy, where Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel have been used like that, and Kyle Juszczyk has as well. But Jalen Hurd's the guy that they really want to use like that. That's the guy they drafted him to do what they drafted him to do. And, we see him, we're going to see him all over the field. So I'm super excited for him. I think he's one of those guys that we just don't really know what to expect in terms of like production, how he's going to look. I don't really think you can go back and, watch like games from 3-4 years ago and go, oh, he's going to look like this. Like we don't know if he's going to look like that. So a lot of ifs with Jalen Hurd, but still super exciting and super a guy that we should be expect or hoping to come out and just look like that gadget and just kind of freak athlete player that he has been in the past. But outside of those guys, the last few receivers, River Craycraft, Mohamed Sanu, Trent Sherfield, and Kevin White. I think one of those guys will probably make the roster, and that's probably it. Do you think that's about right, Aiden?
Yeah, I think it'll be 6 receivers make the roster. I don't think River Craycraft sadly makes the roster. I think Sanu's firmly on the bubble. If you have a surprise where Richie James doesn't make it, I think that opens his opportunity, but I don't expect him to make it. And Kevin White apparently was doing well in practice, but we never saw him in games. So I think he's on the outside looking in as well.
And then I didn't mention Travis Benjamin. I will say I think Travis Benjamin has the best chance out of all these other guys. And I know that you said you didn't think he would make it. I think there's a very good chance that he makes it as just kind of like a vertical threat. And maybe I don't know what but I think Richie James is going to take that role. So that's the thing. But I do think there's a decent enough chance that Travis Benjamin makes the team. I mean, he's been a good NFL receiver for quite some time. Just we haven't seen him in a while. So that's kind of one of those things. And we haven't seen him play for the 49ers, which also kind of makes it tough to evaluate him in Kyle's system because we just don't know what they want to do with him. But I think that's going to do it for this wide receiver stuff. But let's move on to the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, Talanoa Hufanga. I said that right? So Talanoa Hufanga coming out of USC. We talked about him a little bit before. Definitely the most exciting player from day 3. You could say Elijah Mitchell just because he's a running back, but Talanoa Hufanga comes out, and you informed me of this quote, Aiden. But you gotta let everyone know what he came out and said after he was drafted because I love it. I think it'll get everyone a little bit fired up.
After he got drafted, I think you can see it on like the 49ers YouTube page. He came out and said that doesn't expect to play a whole lot right away on defense, but his goal for this year is to be a special teams Pro Bowler, which I think is awesome. It's a lofty goal, but he's a guy who could definitely do it, and it kind of just shows the mentality that I just love this guy.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. Like you bring up the mentality. That's something that you can see too when he's playing. You see the physicality, you see the violence, you see the natural football instincts. I mean, this is a guy that was playing safety in college. They ran a 4.64. That is a really slow time. And we talked about it a lot. We both think that he's more fit to play that Sam linebacker position and just kind of be more of like, hey, go wreck the game, go come off the edge every once in a while. You're going to have to cover running backs coming out of the backfield and fullbacks and tight ends and do that kind of stuff. But you're not going to have to, line up as a true safety. It's a little bit difficult for 4.64 speed. But in college, he made up for that lack of speed with his instincts and just, I mean, he's a good football player. Like you need good football players. And to talk about like being a special teams Pro Bowler, I love it because that's something that Kyle and John that they need to start hitting on some bigger special teams players. Since Kyle's been the coach, like their special teams haven't fared very well, like league wide. A lot of just like dumb turnovers. A lot of it's the return game. We've seen Dante Pettis come in there and get helicoptered and fumble the football. But, bringing these guys in that are just good football players, it opens a door for them staying on the team for a long time. So I love that he immediately is coming in saying, I don't know if I'm going to play a lot on defense, but you're going to feel my impact on special teams. And I think that's my goal is to be a Pro Bowler in that area. Another thing that you wrote down in the notes, Aiden, he works out with Troy Polamalu. So always love to see that. But this mold of being 6'1", I think 209 is what I read. That's what the Niners have been using in that Sam role. So maybe he beats out Aziz. I don't know. I don't know if he's truly. I don't know if he's going to actually like win that Sam linebacker spot. And they made it seem like he could project to be a box safety at this level. I don't know if he's going to be there, but I think that we're going to see a lot of him on special teams, and we're going to see that violence and physicality right out of the gate.
Yeah, I 100% agree. He's a guy who we're not sure what he's going to play, but I 100% expect him to start in 2022, whether it be at safety or at Sam linebacker. Aziz and Nathan Jerry are both free agents, as are Tart and Marcel Harris after this 2021 season. I think that you use this year to find out where Hufanga is the best, and kind of figure out where you want to play this guy, because I think he's a starter for 10 years. I would love to see him in that linebacking core with Greenlaw, Fred, and him. Um, and he's a guy who, if he plays Sam linebacker, this is kind of getting ahead of myself because we don't even know what he's going to play, but he's a guy where if you don't want to pay two linebackers, you may not have to pay a guy like Greenlaw, who's coming up pretty soon, is going to want a pretty hefty contract. You could slide him over to take over that Greenlaw role, and potentially draft another guy. Just gives you a lot of flexibility. And he was my favorite pick, other than the Trey Lance pick, probably, and the guy that I'm super excited to watch and kind of see make plays.
Well, like that you say 10-year career. Because you think about a day 3 pick cashing in on a 10-year career, that would be a huge win. And just kind of bringing up like how he is as a player, talk about having a 10-year career, talking about, being a guy that maybe doesn't come out there, he doesn't, flash like a superstar player, he's a limited player. Those kind of guys that can totally have long careers. And Hufanga is the exact guy to, come in, make some big plays, have some splash plays every now and then, and just play with a lot of heart, a lot of hustle, and just be that true, like, hey, we don't really we play him at Sam linebacker. Sam linebacker only sees the field about 35% of the time, but he's out there making play after play. If he's able to do that, then that's definitely a possibility. I do think 10 years is a little bit lofty, but he can come out there and be an immediate fan favorite kind of player on defense. I think that's what we should expect from him. I think we're going to see a lot of people really liking Hufanga early on. I wouldn't be surprised if, in the first month or two, he has a massive play on special teams where he just blows someone up or causes a fumble or, just gets guys fired up. But this guy that's playing with a lot of energy had 4 interceptions in 2020, I believe. And that was mostly just from, being able to be in the right spot at the right time and having those really good football instincts. Because like I said, what I've heard is that, people question the speed of him to play at that safety at the next level, and even question his speed at USC at playing safety. So if you're able to kind of move into that Sam linebacker role, which, and we're talking like almost like strictly about Sam linebacker, but we've been big advocates of bringing a guy like this into that spot. And we talked about who was the guy that we had a mock to them?
The guy out of Syracuse, I think.
Yeah, we had another like hybrid safety kind of guy mock to play Sam linebacker.
The Auburn guy. The Auburn guy.
Sherwood. Sherwood was the last. Jameen Sherwood. Yeah, we had Jameen Sherwood mock to them, and we thought they were going to go there. I think he got picked like a pick or two before them too. So, maybe a little bit of a blessing here for the Niners. You get a guy that, I mean, a lot of people thought Hufanga was going to be a third-round player, a second-round player. He slides to the 5th, and they could capitalize on this very well. I mean, we know about the Niners' 5th-round picks. Everyone loves the 5th-round picks. Got a lot of hits there, so hopefully this is another guy. And then, Aiden, you kind of wrote like a couple guys that you think are on the roster bubble. Do you just want to get into them real quick and maybe talk about Hufanga can kind of take their spot and potentially make it tough for these guys to really be battling for a position this year?
Yeah, 100%. So we made an interesting signing a couple weeks ago now with Tavon Wilson, who's kind of like a strong safety hybrid. We gave him, I think, $1 million guarantee, or we gave him $1 million cap hit, but I don't think he has any guaranteed money. He's a guy I have no idea. He's like a veteran. I think he's in his 30s. No idea what his role is going to be or what he's going to look like. Maybe he's insurance for Tart, because Tart always gets hurt at least 3 to 5 games. But I think that this means Marcel Harris is probably out. And there's a couple of special teams guys like Kai Nakua, I don't know if I butchered that, and Jared Maiden, who, again, if this guy's going to play special teams and is going to love playing special teams, it kind of makes those guys a little bit expendable. But I don't expect us to carry more than at most 5 safeties. That's a lot of safeties, especially when a guy like Tarvarius Moore, who I expect to be the backup at free safety, can potentially do both. Just makes it difficult to really project. But if I had to guess, I would say Hufanga makes the roster, as well as Marcel Harris, or as well as Tavarius Moore, Ward, Tart, and I guess I'll throw Tavon Wilson in there. Yeah, so basically we signed Tavon Wilson. He's $1 million cap hit, but no guaranteed money. Not really sure what he's going to look like. He's a veteran, really hard to project. Hasn't played with the Niners, but he's a guy that D'Amico Ryans, I guess, wanted to bring in. But the biggest thing is Marcel Harris is on the bubble, and because Hufanga wants to play special teams, guys who have played special teams in the past, like Kai Nakua, I don't know if I butchered that, and Jared Maiden are firmly on the bubble. I don't really expect them to make the roster. Maybe one of them, but I don't really expect us to carry more than 5 safeties. Especially if Tavon Wilson is willing to play special teams. So if I had to guess, I would say at free safety, you roll with Ward and Moore, and at strong safety, you roll with Tart, Tavon Wilson, and Hufanga. And those are your 5. Maybe you bring in just a 6 special team guy, but it's only 53, and I find it hard to believe that you're going to roster 6 safeties week in, week out.
I think you're definitely right on that. You also wrote down the notes like Jared Maiden could make the practice squad. Definitely think that could happen. I think Marcel Harris and Tavon Wilson are competing for that other roster spot at safety. And if you do bringing in 5 safeties seems like kind of a lot. But like we talked about, Hufanga is a very versatile player, and he's going to be on special teams. He's probably going to come down and play a little bit of Sam, going to play a little bit of strong safety as well. Like we're going to see him all over the place. So he's not like taking up a true safety roster spot if he can come down and play a little bit of linebacker as well. So I definitely think you're spot on there. Really interesting to see how Marcel Harris and Tavon Wilson look early on, because I do think that you're right about them kind of competing for that backup strong safety spot for this year. And Tavon Wilson was just a 1-year deal. Marcel Harris only has a year left. So either of these guys, it could very well be their last year on the 49ers. And then we see Hufanga come in and kind of take over that spot. And then, of course, I mean, you got Kwaski Tart too that's on a 1-year deal. So this strong safety spot is definitely, kind of thin in terms of what the future holds. We don't really know. But, I mean, that's pretty much what I got for Hufanga. I think he's a guy that should be on everyone's radar. Rookie minicamp, I want to say it starts on Friday this week. So, I mean, this is a guy that we got to definitely watch out for, see how he looks. He definitely could be a guy that's a big riser in training camp because he comes out there and everyone loves him. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of things from the media about, oh, Hufanga did this today. Hufanga had a pick in practice, got everyone riled up. So definitely expect that to be the case. But definitely keep Hufanga on your radar. I'm very confident that he's going to make this roster, and we're going to see him all over the field and in a lot of different spots, and a lot of times probably on special teams as a rookie. But I'm excited for it. I think that he could be a big day 3 hit. And I think that's huge for this Niners team that needs some depth in that linebacker / secondary kind of area, because they haven't really had that this recently. I mean, at linebacker outside of Fred and Dre, you don't really have a ton. You got Aziz, you got Gary, you got a couple guys there that can play the Sam spot and maybe back them up. But I like Hufanga to do that. And it's going to be really cool to see kind of how they utilize him early on, because he's a very versatile player that we can see in a lot of different spots. So got to make sure to keep eyes on where he's lining up in practice and whatnot. But I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Aiden, anything else you wanted to add before we kind of take off out of here?
No, super excited. I think schedule officially releases tomorrow. So we'll come back at you with an episode after that. And super excited to get this thing rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. So